For certain brands, they can grow to become synonymous with one model. Zenith is one of the rare instances where a movement, El Primero, is inextricably linked to the brand. And as is often the case when one aspect of a brand towers above, it leaves a casting shadow where other areas can be less appreciated. In the case of Zenith, their contributions to aviation are one of those points, having produced pilot watches since essentially the genesis of manned flight. And in this video, we will look at their newly updated pilot watches in a 3-hand configuration in steel and ceramic, and cover everything you should know about what I believe are some of the most overlooked releases thus far in 2023. Let's jump in. During this video today, if you're liking what you are seeing at teddybaldassarre.com, we are an authorized dealer for Zenith, and we have recently added to our assortment to include over 25 different styles, including a variety of Chronomasters, including the personal favorite of mine, the Chronomaster Original, showcasing one of the most wearable cases in the world of automatic chronographs, being under 13 millimeters thick and coming with a 38 millimeter case with a high beat movement, an integrated chronograph movement that is absolutely a legend. Also, the many variations within the DeFi collection, including their best-selling DeFi Skyline that was unveiled last year, and many other different revival pieces that you can get lost in, whether they're in the DeFi collection or one of the Chronomasters. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about Zenith and seeing what's available, check out the link in the description down below. So as I alluded to in the intro, when Zenith arises in the conversation, most immediately people will jump to the iconic El Primero that debuted in 1969. And while that heritage is no doubt at the core of what modern Zenith is and does well, it would be an oversight to ignore the brand's rich history in the arena of aviation timekeeping. Now, Zenith's founder had the impressive foresight of trademarking the words pilot or pilot starting in the late 1800s, well before much of what we now consider the advent of manned flight, even today making them the only brand that can put the word pilot on their dials. In 1909, Zenith produced an early pilot's wristwatch for Louis Blériot's crossing of the English Channel before producing a range of capable aviation chronographs for the Italian military starting in the 1960s. Despite that impressive lineage, Zenith backed away from aviation-oriented watches in the late 1960s, instead leading into, as you probably would guess, the incredible success of the automatic El Primero calibers and automotive-oriented chronographs. Jumping ahead to the early 2010s, Zenith borrowed elements from one of the brand's early cockpit clocks with the Type 20 collection, not to be confused with Breguet's Type 20, while also reviving its Italian military chronograph design starting in 2016. Still, there were many that found the existing pilot watches for Zenith more niche in their execution, being difficult to pull off for a wide variety of risks. Announced alongside the also intriguing Pilot Big Date Flyback, a 42.5 millimeter chronograph with a starting price of $11,500, it was actually the simpler Pilot Automatic that spoke to me the most this year at Watches and Wonders, being one of my favorites from the show. And today we're going to be looking at two configurations of this 3-hand model, with the steel version and the ceramic version, with the steel version coming in at $7,500 and the ceramic at $9,600. Both of them come with a versatile 40 millimeter diameter and a high frequency in-house caliber, surprisingly bearing the El Primero name. Now on the wrist, the 40 millimeter diameter, 13.3 millimeter thickness, and 49.6 millimeter lug to lug of these pilots amount to a relatively versatile dimension set that should pair well on all but the smallest or largest of wrists. While the lug to lug is slightly longer than the proposed dimension you might expect from a 40 millimeter case, it wears only slightly larger than the proposed diameter, a theme carried out by many pilot watches that you'll find in the market, including the Mark 20, which we'll talk about a bit more at the conclusion of this video and where this watch stacks up. Taking a look at the steel variant, the Pilot Auto combines vertical brushing along the case sides with a polished facet traveling the length of the case, while being topped with a prominent bezel that is vertically brushed on top and polished on its sloping boundary. For a more modern take, the microblasted ceramic variant is completely matte with its execution, while also of course feeling lighter on the wrist compared to its steel sibling. Despite the more involved process to develop the case, the architecture is all business, providing providing a matte utilitarian aesthetic that lets the blacked out look do the talking. An oversized push-pull crown at 3 offers a rounded shape with deep ridges that make winding or setting easier than many watches, pairing with the case back, which is affixed with 4 very tiny screws, and securing this watch's very solid 100 meters of water resistance. In either case material, the Zenith Pilot opts for a Cordura and rubber strap that complements the rugged aviation aesthetic, tapering from 20 millimeters at the lugs to a slender 16 millimeters and terminating with a dual deployant butterfly style clasp that is steel in either case, but PVD coated on the ceramic reference. Resting atop the case, a very slightly domed sapphire crystal with anti-reflective coating on both sides makes for an impressively clear view of the modern dial execution lying just beneath. What immediately captivated me when these watches were first revealed was the dial's unique just display and a big part of really what separated it from the more conventional approach of aviation watches in the price segment. Offering 3-dimensionality along with a few touches that pair novelty with Zenith's aviation DNA. Executed in matte black, the central dial surface is equipped with horizontal ridges that are striking when directed towards the light, adding a level of visual interest that helps make these otherwise more subdued presentations pop. At the outskirts, a white on black printed minute track lies seated below the level of the central dial where the applied Arabic indices with polished metallic surrounds secure the perimeter. Speaking to the typeface, the effect here is a choice of Arabic indices that harken back to the brand's earliest Pilot references, while the hands feel like an updated take on the Flieger format, pairing stark white with black bases that seem to disappear against the dial surface, making this watch extremely easy to read. At 12, an applied Zenith Star logo rests above the printed brand wordmark with Pilot in quotation marks. At 6, speaking to Zenith's ownership of the word in the timekeeping arena. And just below, the expected Arabic figure for 6 has been left out in favor for a pill-shaped hour marker, resting horizontally in a way of adorning the faceted date aperture, exposing a color-matching date wheel below. With this being a Zenith, flipping the watch around gives us view of an in-house caliber, also following the Zenith El Primero name. The brand's legendary El Primero movements have long been associated with merely their chronographs. However, as of late, it has begun to find itself at home in different models, especially in the 3-hand variety. In 2022, with the release of the DeFi Skyline, the brand introduced a time-only El Primero caliber known as the 3620, essentially taking the base architecture from the modern El Primero 3600, seen in watches like the Chronomaster Sport and Chronomaster Original, which is itself based on original El Primero caliber 400 architecture. By removing the chronograph functionality while retaining the high beat 5 Hz oscillating frequency Zenith is known for, the caliber created a fusing of experimentation and consistency established by way of decades of fine-tuning these movement-making principles. The 3620 SC included in this new Pilot differs from the Skyline in that it lacks the quirky 1/10 of a second small seconds display in favor of a standard center seconds, all while including hacking, maintaining the 5 Hz 36,000 vibration per hour frequency, and still featuring an extended 60-hour power reserve alongside the smoother sweep of that second hand. The movement finish is utilitarian, opting for brushing and blasting instead of polishing across the bridges and main plate that is visible in the exposed areas surrounding the balance. For the smaller details and calling them out, the regulating organ features a blued screw, the rotor comes in an all black configuration, with the only pop of color coming from the silicon escapement wheel, visible in a bright shade of purple, moving at a quicker than normal pace. Speaking to its general specifications and operations, the 3620 SC operates at 36,000 vibrations per hour, 5 Hz, hacking stopping the seconds hand when you pull the crown to the farthest position, and a power reserve of 60 hours. So now let's unpack, talk a little bit more about these Zenith Pilot watches, share some of my closing thoughts, pros and cons, things to consider. So in general, as I've been saying many times throughout this video, the Pilot collection is one that is overlooked by many when considering Zenith. And part of that is the overcasting shadow that comes from the El Primero, commonly associated with their chronographs. But when you're looking at the history of this brand, and when I was sitting down and first being shown these watches, that was something that it kind of caught me off guard about this whole history of Pilot design, the trademark or the kind of ownership of that Pilot name being the first there is pretty intriguing. So to begin with some of the cons, we'll shift into some of the pros. I think number one, this is a busy type of area and you have some real leaders when it comes to pilot watches in the sub $10,000 range, I think the number one that you're going to have to bring up is the Mark 20. This stacks up basically directly as a competitor to that is going to be slightly more affordable than this. So I think that's probably the number one consideration when you're looking at a watch like this. It's a much more modern take and doesn't lean as much into a Flieger design as it is more to an aviation style. It still has many of those principles, very easy to read, but also has these different approaches that I think make it a bit different compared to some of the more run-of-the-mill pilot watches on the market. I like the backdrop display, but you have to mention the competition here first because that's what a lot of people are going to consider when looking at a watch like this. Some also might think that the design is maybe a tad out there for a pilot's watch. Pilot watches generally are all about the business. This is still a watch that's very much about doing the job of delivering on what somebody would want from a pilot watch, but it does have some design approaches that are a little bit more unconventional. And then finally, it does wear a little bit larger than 40 millimeters, but still relatively very wearable. Now let's shift into some of the pros. And the number one reason why this popped out to me first was the dial design. I like the approach. I like how it's different. It's not the conventional look that you have from a pilot's watch. And when you do get it underneath the light, it does play with you quite a bit. And I know that's kind of a cliche term in classification of dials and colors and ways of describing watches, but this one is that. If you look at it at certain angles, the lined surface does not appear as prominent as it does when you can just get it underneath the light. It's a cool balancing act that I really enjoy. This is also going to be a pretty mass appealing design if you're looking for a watch under $10,000. Everyday style, 100 meters of water resistance, high beat, one of the few high beat calibers available in a 3-hand configuration. The only one that's really doing anything else here is probably Grand Seiko, that you could say to any reasonable degree, and doing it with a lot of production. So that makes it a bit more unique in that consideration, and getting 60 hours of power reserve in the process while getting that clean sweep of that second hand that's going to outdo many of the competitors at 4 hertz. And just to offer a counterpoint to the first con, which is the competition, the competition is pretty singularly located, and as much as there are other watches that you could consider here, there aren't that many. I think the ones that are here are quite good, so that is potentially why I would mention that as maybe one of the considerations. But if you are looking at a watch under $10,000 that is a pilot watch configuration from a brand that does have certainly a say in their aviation history, you absolutely need to put something like this on the list. And this was one of the areas that was missing from Zenith. You looked at many of their pilot watches and they were potentially too large for some, maybe appealing to a certain crowd. This has a little bit of its own flair and maybe isn't going to be for everybody, but its case, its styling, wearability, versatility is going to allow this to be a viable option under $10,000. And it's one of those pieces this year that when you look at something that is just being mass appealing, versatile in its approach, delivering on a watch that's simple in its color array with this black and white high contrast, you almost forget that it's maybe filling a void that you didn't know was there, because potentially it doesn't grab all the attention from somebody in the room. But if you get to the core of it, it is delivering something that maybe was a void in the market. Factoring all this in, reason why I think this is one of those overlooked pieces of 2023 so far. But all right, guys, that is my take looking at this new Zenith Pilot Watch collection. What is your thoughts on this collection? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Leave comments down below. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that. Also check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. If you are in the market for a watch, how we're able to fund all of the productions on this channel. It's not from the brands paying us to make this content. It's through selling watches on our site. So we would love to have your business if you are looking at a watch. I'd love to help you out, and it allows us to keep doing what we're doing here, and we love what we do. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I'll see you all very soon.